Marvel shoot. Get ready to talk about some Marvel. Hi there, you guys. So sorry it's been so long since I've done another video. I really wanted to put out another one after my Iron Man 3 video, but unfortunately I just haven't had the time to record anything or to really see any other movies. I haven't seen Star Trek Into Darkness yet. I want to see it, but I just haven't had a chance to see it yet. But I did want to do a discussion video because I finally have time to shoot at night and in the dark, because, you know, that's the whole point of my reviews, is because I'm usually awake at night. I wanted to do a discussion video about X-Men Days of Future Past, and now the reason I want to talk about it is because I want to separate my opinion from the Wolverine discussion video that I did and my opinion of the upcoming X-Men Days of Future Past film, because my opinion about these two films are not the same, despite the fact that they are both part of the same franchise. I am more excited for one than the other, and the one I'm more excited for is X-Men Days of Future Past. Based on what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing, it is, as Hugh Jackman said, I think going to be the X-Men's version of the Avengers. When you have a storyline and the cast that they're accumulating for this film, there's not really much room to think, you know, this isn't going to be absolutely balls to the wall epic. This is a film, this is a storyline that has kind of, at this point, it's been done a lot. I mean, it's pretty much the storyline of Looper. It's, you know, someone from the X-Men in the dystopian future, which has been overrun basically by Sentinels, which is basically these gigantic robots that were created by a man named Trask, have basically taken over humanity, and mutants are now being knocked off one by one. They're basically becoming an endangered species, or they're put into internment camps. And even humanity in and of itself is overrun by the Sentinels. And in the future, Kitty Pryde, who is an X-Men, obviously, she basically goes back to the past to warn the X-Men, to say there's one particular moment in time that triggers all of these events from occurring. And so it only makes sense that, you know, that you're going to include the cast from the original trilogy of X-Men movies and the ones that have just started up with X-Men First Class. Now, to reiterate my opinion on the X-Men movies in general, first two are fantastic. Third is crap. X-Men Origins Wolverine is crap. And X-Men First Class is fantastic. So in terms of how the franchise is doing overall, it's not as, I would say, as balanced as the Marvel Cinematic Universe is in terms of its overall franchise. Because if you think about it, I mean, people have said, you know, Thor wasn't that great and Captain America wasn't that great. But personally, I think that those two films were fantastic for the purposes that they need to establish. You know, they needed to establish these characters, and they needed to establish the universes that they come from and the setting that they come from, because they obviously come from completely different places, like Iron Man and Iron Man 2, as well as The Incredible Hulk. You know, these are films where they really needed to solidify these individual characters, and I think it's done a fantastic job of doing that, which is why the Avengers worked so well. Because there was an appropriate lead up to it. I would say that if people really didn't think Thor and Captain America were that good, then I don't think the Avengers would have done as well as it has. And I do think, despite the fact X-Men is the series in terms of comics that I am the most familiar with, and it is my favorite of the comics that I like to read, it is the one I'm most familiar with, because I was a fan of the X-Men since I was a kid. When I watched the animated series, when I watched X-Men Evolution, I read the comics from basically age 7 and up. You know, I've been really into this franchise for a long time. This is a storyline, Days of Future Past, is, despite the fact that now in film and television, I want to say, it's kind of been done a lot, I think this is going to be I think this is like where the source kind of comes from, because the storyline idea has been done a lot, but when it was done in the comics in the 80s, you know, 3 decades ago, it hadn't really been done to death. It was a novel idea, and it was an interesting idea, especially considering that the mutant population was, in the comics and in many of the incarnations of it, is always seemed to be under threat of being eliminated because of the fear that humanity shows them. It is the strongest part about the X-Men universe, is the fact that there is this major conflict. It is the reason why there is such a strong motivation for pretty much every single thing that they do in these universes, because there is this constant threat and this constant conflict. It's never going to go away. And that's a great source of inspiration for all these different stories. And Days of Future Past is probably the storyline that X-Men fans want to see the most. It is the one that is the most well-known. It is the most iconic, especially with the cover of Wolverine and Kitty Pryde standing in front of a wall with all the posters of mutants that are being, captured and sought out and slain and all that kind of stuff. It's an incredible storyline, and I'm kind of wondering if I should make speculations about, what they're going to do in terms of like how they're going to use their characters, because at the moment, a majority of the film, from what I hear, is going to take place in the 1970s, so about a decade after X-Men First Class. And then I'm going to think that maybe about another third of the film is going to be taking place in the future, which is going to include the cast members from the original trilogy of X-Men films. So when I think about characters that are most likely to be the one doing the time traveling, to be the one going back into the past to warn the X-Men about the future and how they need to prevent it, there's 3 contenders I have in mind, and of course one of them is going to be Kitty Pryde, because she's the one who does it in the comics. It's the one that makes the most sense to go with, because we do have Ellen Page coming back and playing Kitty Pryde. There will probably be some motivation with Iceman with that occurring, because in some articles I've read, Sean Ashmore, who plays Iceman, he's been talking about how Iceman has a much more grittier and darker storyline than what we're used to with him in the movies. So realistically, all we're really used to with Kitty Pryde and Bobby is the love triangle that goes on with them and Rogue. So it'll be interesting to actually see something with a little bit more grit and down and dirty kind of stuff going on, and much more conflict with these characters than just romance, basically. The other contenders I have in mind, one of which is Bishop, because it has basically been confirmed at this point that Bishop is going to be in the movie. And the reason we know it's been confirmed is because we've seen set photos where you see these banners that have some of the characters' names on them, and one of them says Warpath, one of them says Bishop. So we're like, okay, Bishop is definitely going to be in the movie then. I'm thinking that it could be Bishop as well, because in the animated series, Bishop is the character that time travels in sort of the place of Kitty Pryde when this storyline comes up in the first season, I believe. Now, how it plays out is different, but the general storyline is still there. Dystopian future, Sentinels take over, someone time travels back to warn the X-Men about an event. It's all pretty much the same elements, just slight details changed. And I think Bishop is a really good character to be the one to do that, because it's a character we haven't seen before in the movies. Bishop is a really strong character in the comic books. I really like him as a character. He's fantastic. And I think he's the character that I think is the most unfamiliar with the X-Men of the past. And it's sort of like, okay, the X-Men of the future have really come to know Bishop and really understand him, and through them knowing and understanding him, but then him being the one going back and warning the past X-Men, that's how we come to understand him, because, he's basically meeting this whole group of people who he knows in the future, but don't know him in the past. And so he kind of has to get to know them again, and they kind of have to earn his trust again. And I think that's a great way to introduce a new character in this universe when you've got a cast of basically thousands already. My other guess for who might be doing the time traveling, and it's based on a set photo I saw, I think it's going to be Wolverine. And the reason I think it's going to be Wolverine is because there's a photo of Hugh Jackman and the guy who plays Young Beast. I forget the actor's name, and that's terrible because I really like him as Beast and I really should know his name. But the guy who plays Young Beast are on set together, and they're in a scene together, and they're both dressed like they're from the 70s. Either Logan is already involved with the X-Men somehow in the past, or he's the one doing the time traveling. And I hope that that's not the case. I really do hope that Logan isn't the one doing the time traveling, because it would feel like, again, and I've reiterated this before, it would feel like Logan is again taking the spotlight in a movie where he's basically had the lead role in all these other movies. And I feel like it's time to let someone else be the character that has sort of the burden on them. And I feel like Bishop is the most appropriate choice. as much as Kitty Pryde would be the smartest choice in terms of continuity from the comic books, I like the idea more of Bishop being the one to do it, because we need to. I think they need to find a way to introduce him to an audience that may not know him from the comics or from the animated series, who doesn't know anything about this character and is really brand new into this franchise. I think he's the most appropriate one to be the one that does the time traveling. And I really wanted to get into something really quickly about the X-Men universe overall, whether it's the comics or the movies. One of the biggest issues, I think, with the X-Men universe and getting people invested in it is the fact that it's so hard to keep track of storylines because there's so many characters. One of the great things about the X-Men is the fact that there's a character for everybody. There is a character that you can attach yourself to and follow, and there is this bigger conflict going on. But if there's ever like a side story, usually there's one character that you'll follow, and you won't really follow anyone else's side plots. For me, the characters that I tend to follow the most in the X-Men universe is Wolverine, Gambit, and Rogue, which is fantastic because Rogue is pretty much in all of the different X-Men comics right now. Like, I don't think there is a book that she's not in. She's practically everywhere. Wolverine is kind of all over the place too. He's been like that for a long time in the comics, where he's with the Avengers, he's with the X-Men, and all these little side X-Men books. And Gambit just got his own solo series, but unfortunately it just got canceled. Once the 17th issue comes out, it's canceled. So it's like, oh great, he got his own book again, and it's gone again. But those are the characters I tend to follow the most. And to me, it's because I really like, there's a couple of things I really like about them. A, it's their powers. I like their powers. And I like their storylines. I like how complex they are. Wolverine in and of himself is an enigma, and he is complex. When you think of complex superheroes, probably the one I think about the most is Wolverine. He's probably the most conflicted. And then the reason I like Rogue and Gambit is because not only do they have a great story together, but they have fantastic individual stories as well. There is something that to be admired about these individual characters, but the fact is like, just because those are mine doesn't necessarily make all the other characters in the universe any less interesting or any less complex. Someone is going to read these characters and see into something that they can latch on to or can be invested in. I personally don't understand why people like Cyclops as a character, but clearly there are some people who like him. In the comics recently, he's become more interesting. I know we just had Avengers vs. X-Men, and I haven't actually caught up all the way with it yet, so I need to catch up on that. I know something happens with Cyclops, so I gotta read that, but there is a character for everybody, and that's a good thing about having casts of thousands in the X-Men. But the thing about the X-Men is the fact that it's not just about a group of superheroes. When you're talking about, rather than just a small team of superheroes, kind of like Fantastic Four or the Avengers are, you're talking about an entire population of people who are called mutants, who all have abilities, who all have powers, but all do not associate themselves with the X-Men. Lots of these people have never met the X-Men, don't know them, do not have any training like the X-Men do in a way to use their powers properly, how to train themselves, how to fight, how to defend themselves. A lot of these people live in conditions where there's strong prejudice against them. And the story just so happens to focus a lot on a superhero group, but it does come into contact with mutants every so often that are not related to them whatsoever and are just regular mutants. And I think that's a fantastic way of looking at this, is the fact that it's not just a superhero team. These are humans who happen to be born a certain way. And it's like looking at the gay community, because that's the strongest parallel that the X-Men has right now in terms of using it as a metaphor for something that's going on in real life. The gay community now is the strongest parallel. When X-Men was first coming out, it was the civil rights movement. And I've always really liked that, because it does say something really strong about us as a society, I think. And rather than just focusing on a team of mutants the way that X-Men first started out, it has now turned into a story about a community of people, not just individual characters. So when you read something like the X-Men comics, you're usually following a bigger story that's more than just what's happening to these individual characters. You're following something that affects the whole community, which is why I think something like Days of Future Past, Age of Apocalypse, House of M, these are stories in the X-Men universe that have done the best, I think, and have stayed the most because they're the ones that affect the overall community the most of mutants. House of M, I think, is the one that affects it the most because it's the one that had the largest amount of consequences for them. You know, Scarlet Witch basically says no more mutants, and I forget the exact percentage, but it's something like 90% of the mutant population is wiped out. Like, that's a huge percentage of mutants just gone. And a lot of X-Men lost their abilities, they lost their powers. Jubilee was one of them. It's a really awesome thing to see in a comic, though, where there's actually some lasting consequences. So often in comics, you know, especially X-Men, you usually see characters that'll die, but then, you know, a year or two later, they come right back. It's happened with Jean Grey so many times, Professor X. And it's nice to see consequences actually happen to these characters, to see that there is something that has a lasting effect that carries through for the rest of the series. And I hope that the movie X-Men Days of Future Past is going to have similar outcomes, because we are looking at a dystopian future where X-Men are being hunted and they're being annihilated, they're being slain, they're being apprehended. They're actually facing something that is really detrimental to them and is really destructive to them. And it would be fantastic to see these characters with motivations of something like a really serious imminent threat. I feel like this one is the main storyline where it's like, this is the one that affects mutants overall. This is the one where it's not just about the X-Men fighting the Brotherhood, or it's about, you know, preventing Magneto from destroying a city. This is affecting a future where everyone gets hurt at some point, and we need to stop it. You know, that's a great storyline, and it has great motivation, and it'll be great to see characters that I like and want to see with some passion behind them. I feel like a lot of the times characters will just do things because it's like, oh, we're part of the X-Men, so here we're off, let's go fight. I feel like if a character personally has a reason to prevent something from happening, like say someone that they love is killed by a Sentinel, that's personal motivation to change things and to get them out of this. And I feel like a lot of the times when you have something like on a big scale, and this can apply to politics as well, people don't attach themselves to issues and they don't talk about things like that because they feel like it doesn't affect them on a personal level. And only when it does affect them on a personal level is when they get invested and when they get involved. Another really quick thing that I wanted to talk about was the fact that I'm wondering how Marvel and 20th Century Fox are going to deal with the fact that both Avengers 2 and X-Men Days of Future Past are going to have a character in common. And that character is going to be Quicksilver. Quicksilver has never been introduced in any film format before, live action. He is new to both franchises. I think it's going to be really tricky to sort of deal with the idea that you have a character who is a mutant in franchises where technically one cannot take from the other because of copyright issues and because of who has bought the rights to who. You know, 20th Century Fox owns the Fantastic Four, owns X-Men, Columbia Pictures or Sony owns Spider-Man, and then Marvel owns pretty much everything else that's been made into a film. I'm not sure about the Punisher or Ghost Rider, but at this point I don't really care because neither of which I was really into in terms of the comics, nor have they done particularly well in the box office, so they're not really concerned to me. In terms of the big hitters at the movies for the Marvel Universe, these are the ones that are owned by these particular companies. So it makes sense that, you know, you can't have cameos of Spider-Man swinging in New York City in the Avengers when Tony is in Stark Tower. Despite how much sense that would make, and you know, you fans want to see it, they're not owned by the same people. You know, Marvel doesn't own the rights to Spider-Man or X-Men or Fantastic Four. So how do you have a character that is both an Avenger but is also so closely tied to the X-Men universe as well, appear in both films without bringing up the M word, in other words, mutant. Apparently, one of the ways that they're going to rectify this in Avengers 2 is by not calling them mutants. I don't know what they're going to call them. I don't know how they're going to rectify that. That is probably going to be a bridge too far for me. I find that amazing that that's going to be the thing that I can't stand if they do make it so Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch are not mutants. It's a huge aspect of their characters because they're both children of Magneto. You know, that's a big part of who they are. It's not like I feel like it's not something that can be just swept under the rug. But for the film purposes, you know, at the moment, they can't use X-Men licensing. And X-Men owns the use of the word mutant. Unless they don't use the word mutant, but they just insinuate that they are, I don't really know how they're going to get around it. I'll be very interested to see how they do it. And I'll wonder if they use the same actor, because they've already cast, I totally forget the guy's name. I'm really bad with names right now. But they've already cast Quicksilver for X-Men Days of Future Past. They haven't casted for Avengers 2. So I'm wondering what they're going to do with that. That's a big question mark to be left open. It's something that I'm very anxious to see how they're going to deal with this. You know, obviously we're not going to find out until Avengers 2 comes out how they're going to deal with this, but I just don't want, you know, mutants to be completely taken out of the Marvel Cinematic Universe because someone that couldn't lend, you know, a couple $1 million to buy the right to use the word mutant. You know, you guys are going to make billions of dollars at the box office regardless. This is already a fact. Avengers has done so well that you've pretty much guaranteed that no matter what you do in the future, you're going to make a ton of money. I feel like if they want to do right by the fans, they will spend a little bit of money, well, a little bit, in reality, it's a lot of money to buy the right to use the word mutant. I feel like that would mean so much to the fans to just acknowledge that mutants exist in the same universe as the Avengers. I think that would do a lot for the storyline and to help out with the story of Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch being introduced into the franchise. So I've been blathering on for a while. I really wanted to keep this video much shorter and more concise. I'm just really excited for this movie. I am really looking forward to it. I don't think there's really much that could deter me from liking this movie at this point because it is, I feel like unless the writing is absolutely terrible, which I don't think it will be, but you know, anything can happen. I don't think that there's much that could steer me from this. You know, Bryan Singer is directing it. He's the guy who directed the first two films, which are the best films of that trilogy. And it's got the guy who directed X-Men First Class as a producer. You know, I don't really feel like there's much they can do wrong. And if they do wrong, you know, they're going to piss off a lot of people if they do. Let me know what you guys think about X-Men Days of Future Past. Have a look at some of the articles that are coming out about it. Have a look at some of the set photos. I think they're actually really interesting to see as they're coming out. I feel like they're doing a pretty good job of keeping some things tight-lipped, but I think they're also giving us just enough to get us excited about what's coming, especially finding out that Bishop's going to be in the movie in some respect. Again, he may not be the one doing the time traveling, but he's in the movie. I don't care. I'm happy. We're introducing some new characters. I'm really excited for this, and I cannot wait to see this movie come out. I don't want to wait another year for it. I don't want to wait another year. It's going to be far too long. But in the meantime, you know, we've got the Wolverine. We've got the second Thor film coming out. We've got Captain America coming out next year. So we're going to have a lot of Marvel movies coming out in the next little bit to keep us occupied in between now and X-Men Days of Future Past. So thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you later. Take care. As much as Kitty Pryde would be the most strategical,